Now, it has become abundantly clear that Lucasfilm is in a very delicate position right now. It's like they're walking on eggshells with every single TV show that's released on Disney+, and with everything moving onwards with their, of course, incoming announcements that are going to be very, very minute, mind you, at this upcoming D23 event provided by Disney. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. And let's get right into exactly what's going on with Jon Favreau, Kathleen Kennedy, and George Lucas himself. Now, as you all know, the Ahsoka Tano series is just 1 week away with their 2-episode premiere on August 23rd. Now, a lot of you guys have been talking about this, and I did a recent poll on Twitter on whether or not having Anakin's voice in one of the most recent TV spots is Disney shooting for desperation here with the promotion of the show, or if it's just because they want to, gravitate toward the fans and be very genuine with letting them know that Anakin is indeed coming back into the series. I ran that poll on Twitter, and it was practically neck and neck, 50 and 50. Now, what's interesting about all of this has a lot to do with what Jon Favreau had to say about Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy's ways, and exactly how this all involves George Lucas in the past and, of course, in the present, and exactly what's going on right now. So we're going to be discussing about all of this and what Jon Favreau had to elaborate on, everything ranging from what he had to say about Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, and even George Lucas specifically, and how it kind of gives you a bit of a more vivid view about what has happened in the past couple of years. Let's discuss. Now, with Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni banking on the Ahsoka series to turn Star Wars around for the fans, one important development has to do with Jon Favreau himself exposing both Lucasfilm and Kathy. He went on to deliver the following. Well, when I was working on Mandalorian Season 3 and Boba Fett, the one request that we had to deal with from Kathleen Kennedy was by excluding George from the set. He wasn't really allowed to step foot near us when we were doing all these important scenes for both projects. And I will say it felt wrong filming the scenes between Luke Skywalker and Ahsoka Tano without George Lucas being allowed to supervise what we were doing at that given moment. I think that's what was, of course, the most soul-crushing thing I went through as a creator, was not having George there, because we had him with Season 2 of Mando for the most part, but Kathy specifically instructed to us, even for that season, that George should not oversee or supervise the scenes concerning Luke Skywalker's entrance into Mando Season 2 and returning to that story. She didn't want him to essentially encourage how things should be done with the character on set, and that was an extremely tough challenge to get past as a filmmaker for sure. I love Luke, and I know George does too, and we had a conversation about this recently just before promoting Ahsoka, and one of the biggest regrets was by not pushing himself to change the restrictions that he had met with Kathy for looking everything over for Luke. Now guys, let me just pause here quick, because there's more to talk about, and what more Jon Favreau has to say. What's interesting about this that I take away from is the fact that when we see that moment in Mando Season 2, we can all agree on that was a very big moment in the Star Wars fandom. That's where, coming out of The Last Jedi, 2 whole years practically later, at that point in time, really kind of, more like 3 years actually, at that point in time, Luke coming back in his prime was a very big deal. Regardless of how the technology was a little off at that point, they weren't using deepfake technology. This was CGI Luke, so it kind of looked a little off in some shots, but having him there and realizing that they went to that extra length of bringing him back was impressive and unexpected. And that's why the fans just, had a big positive uproar about what they just witnessed. The fact that Kathleen Kennedy went to an extra length to excluding George Lucas from looking everything over for how the Luke scenes were being performed for The Mandalorian Season 2, day in and day out, it goes to tell you that she does have some kind of deep grudge and deep issues with George Lucas and his philosophy of Star Wars and how Luke is at the center of everything here. We know that as a fact, that when you look at The Last Jedi, it really derailed everything. It most certainly did. There's no denying the fact about that, and The Rise of Skywalker tried to fix things up, and it just did not perform well at doing that job at all. And so Jon and Dave really tried to attempt to bring that back with Mando Season 2. And you know what? After Mando Season 2, that's when we started getting very much let down with a lot of shows, like the Kenobi series, with Boba Fett did not perform well in my eyes. It had its moments, but in the grand scheme of things, those shows were just utter, horrible trash. If you're looking at them from start to finish, very fan-filmy-esque. It had its moments here and there that stuck out where it had great cinematography, but I find a lot with these Disney Plus Star Wars shows that there's many points in time where they come across as looking like fan films. The way it's shot, the way the angles are presented, the way the cameras move, the costumes, all these different ways of lighting, it just seems like not as much quality is being poured into these things as they should be. You see the Marvel Cinematic Universe shows, and they look like actual movies, and then you go to Star Wars, and it doesn't quite add up to that level. That's what I never really got. I don't know if you guys ever noticed this, but that's one thing that I did notice. And a lot of it just has to do with the fact that Disney does not understand how Star Wars is meant to be presented. So, moving onwards, he goes on to elaborate further. He sort of just accepted those demands for what they were and waited until everything was filmed and displayed. We have some pretty big surprises coming for Ahsoka, and we hope that George is pleased with what we did with that show. Though I wasn't all that involved, this was all Dave mostly, and he had to make some very bold choices in the show that hopefully agrees with the audience we are trying to gravitate towards. But yes, not having George with us for those Luke moments just felt like something was missing. So here's the problem with this, is the fact that Jon is making it openly clear and very vivid that the Luke scenes from Mando Season 2 and the Book of Boba Fett, he was not allowed to look those over, nor was he allowed to look over the entirety of Mando Season 3. We already knew that though, we talked about that months ago. But as it turns out, the finale of The Mandalorian Season 3, George was not allowed to intervene. For that specific reason. Kennedy wanted to make the finale of Mando Season 3 a love letter to The Last Jedi. And alas, while you have the Praetorian Guards, while you have the Darksaber getting destroyed, much like how the Skywalker Saber gets destroyed in The Last Jedi. We also have a fight between Moff Gideon and all of these different Mandalorian troopers, as I like to call them, going against the Mandalorians. That's almost like the equivalent of the battle that's happening in this, situation in The Last Jedi, where you had basically Bo-Katan and Din Djarin doing their thing against Gideon. It was like Rey and Kylo with Snoke, and there was a lot of parallels, to put it simply put there, is the fact that Kathleen Kennedy, we talked about this too, she even opened up about this months ago, that she wanted to create parallels, or callbacks to The Last Jedi in Mando Season 3, and trying to really connect it with the sequel trilogy as apparent as possible, to make that very clear to the audience. Something that Jon Favreau didn't really fully agree with, and he just had to deal with it at the time. But guys, I would like to hear what you have to say about all of this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.
From night to moon, we hear them moans again.